Walther Rathenau was born in Berlin on the 29th of September 1867 into a wealthy Jewish family. His father, Emil, had founded die Allgemeine Elektrizitätsgesellschaft, or AEG, a renowned producer of electrical equipment. Young Walther was very eager to follow in his father's footsteps. After studying at the universities of Berlin and Strasbourg, as well as the Technical University of Munich, he joined the AEG in 1893 as an expert in the field of electrochemistry and led the expansion of the electrochemical works at Bitterfeld. He swiftly rose up the ranks inside the company, and in 1899 he was appointed to the board of directors. Just 5 years later, he was appointed to the supervisory board, and in 1912 he even became its chairman. Under his leadership, the AEG became one of the largest companies in Germany, and until the outbreak of the First World War, Rathenau promoted cartelization within the German electricity sector to stabilize the markets and reduce competition. But he was not just an extremely talented businessman and industrialist, he was also incredibly intelligent, well-educated, and a sharp critic of the society he lived in. He thought deeply about the position of Jews in the German Empire and wrote numerous articles on economic and ethical issues for the influential weekly magazine Die Zukunft. Like many German Jews at the time, Rathenau was a staunch assimilationist and applied to leave the Jewish community as early as 1895, although he never actually did so. Furthermore, he criticized the increasingly mechanized, materialistic, and soulless world people-industrialized nations, such as Germany, had to live in. In 1914, he also entered politics and began to lead the War Raw Materials Department in the Prussian War Ministry. His task was the management of all the vital resources, and until 1915 he coordinated raw materials vital for the war effort and managed to dampen the effects of the British naval blockade. After leaving the department, he served as an advisor to General Erich Ludendorff for a while, but after a quarrel between the two, Rathenau decided to leave all public offices and once again turn to writing. In 1917, he published his visionary magnum opus called Von kommenden Dingen, or Of Things to Come in English. In it, he harshly criticized the wasteful industrial society and presented his vision for a better and fairer world. He demanded radical societal and economic reforms and a very firm grip over the economy and resources at the hands of the state. He called for the prohibition on the production of luxury goods, the removal of the right to inherit wealth, the taxation of private fortunes out of existence, the responsible and centralized use of raw materials, and the equal distribution of wealth. Despite his very clear ideals, he still refrained from rejoining politics until after the end of the war. He played virtually no role in the November Revolution, and even when he did join the left-liberal German Democratic Party, he was not even put on the voting list to the National Assembly, which drew up the constitution and as such had no influence in the making of the Weimar Republic. It was only when reactionary and anti-democratic movements began to organize themselves that Rathenau was given the chance to make a career in politics. In 1920, his economic expertise was needed in the Socialization Commission, a group of experts which discussed the nationalization of some branches of the German industry. Later, he was consulted as an expert in the matter of war reparations. In 1921, he joined the government under Joseph Wirth and became the Minister of Reconstruction. His first major achievement was the Wiesbaden Agreement between him and his French colleague Louis Loucheur, which stipulated that Germany would pay parts of its reparations to France in the form of deliveries of goods instead of currency payments. Rathenau lost his post in October 1921 because his party left the government, but he still remained active as a financial advisor, and in January 1922 he became the new foreign minister. During this time, he became one of the most important advocates for the cooperation with the Allies when it came to fulfilling Germany's demands as set by the Treaty of Versailles. He made it clear that non-compliance was simply not an option, as France would simply use force to achieve its goals, most likely by occupying the Ruhr area, which would be much more costly than simply delivering the required coal. In April 1922, Rathenau tried to overcome Germany's international isolation and to gain room for maneuver in foreign affairs by signing the Treaty of Rapallo with Soviet Russia, which was later extended to all Soviet republics. Both Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to renounce all demands for reparations, to open up diplomatic missions, and to begin economic relations. Germany was, finally, no longer internationally ostracized. This was Rathenau's biggest political achievement, and it remains uncertain what further contributions he might have made. He was one of the brightest personalities in Weimar history, who combined intelligence with politics and who showed great organizational skills and contemplation. Furthermore, he felt a big responsibility towards the German public, was a patriot and firmly stood behind the Weimar Republic. Unfortunately, he became the target of right-wing nationalist circles, who saw in him the personification of everything they despised. Rathenau was a Jew, an intellectual and a Republican. His pragmatic and solution-oriented approach to the question of war reparations was denounced as treacherous, and the Treaty of Rapallo was interpreted as a secret conspiracy between the communists and world Jewry. Wilhelm Henning, a politician for the anti-Semitic and far-right German National People's Party, wrote a hateful tirade about Rathenau. No sooner has the international Jew Rathenau got his hands on German honor than it is no longer an item of discussion. German honor is not a bargaining chip for international Jewish dealings. German honor will be atoned for, but you, Mr. Rathenau, and those behind you will be held accountable by the German people. On the 24th of June 1922, Rathenau's enemies decided to strike. On that day, he was driven by his chauffeur to the prestigious Kurfürstendamm with the goal of reaching the Foreign Office in Berlin-Mitte. Neither he nor his driver noticed that they were being followed by 3 men in a car. As they approached a bend, Rathenau's driver slowed down before a curve to let a horse carriage cross the street. The pursuers sensed their opportunity and caught up with Rathenau's car until they were driving parallel to each other. Suddenly, one of the men got out a submachine gun, quickly aimed and then opened fire at the foreign minister. When Rathenau's driver hit the brakes, another attacker threw a hand grenade into the victim's car, causing further injuries. The driver rushed back to Rathenau's mansion, but it was already too late. The attacks were fatal. Walther Rathenau was dead. News of the wicked murder quickly spread in the capital. The painter Max Liebermann remembers the following reactions very vividly. "I cannot forget that terrible day when my neighbor in Wannsee came into the garden crying. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. I was standing over there in the garden where my painting easel is. Walther has been murdered," he cried. The writer and diplomat, Harry Graf Kessler, wrote in his diary that he was stunned, as if struck by lightning. The historian Erich Marx, who had been waiting for Rathenau in the Foreign Office, writes, "A horrified whisper went through the hall and we were sent home. Rathenau had been murdered on his way to see us." Reich's president, Friedrich Ebert, was on his holiday in the Black Forest when he heard the news. The loss of such a valuable statesman hurt him so much that he got a biliary colic. Against his doctor's advice, he nevertheless made his way to Berlin. The writer and editor of the influential Berliner Tageblatt wrote an article on the front page in which he expressed his dismay. "At the moment when we publish the news of Walther Rathenau's assassination here, we can only express our shock that this brilliantly gifted man, who stood out far above the ordinary and felt warmly for his country, has now, like many others before him, been murdered by an emissary of the conspiracy lurking in the shadows, and we express our deepest horror at the unspeakable conditions in which we live and under which we must now be governed. We are reluctant to accuse entire circles when the act is that of an individual, but here the guilt is so clear, the responsibility so obvious, that it is impossible not to press charges and obscure the glaringly obvious truth. With boundless baseness and inexplicable meanness, Rathenau has been slandered and defamed in German nationalist and German racialist assemblies, and in most newspapers of this persuasion, and this intellectual preparation made the deed possible, made it inevitable. Unfortunately, Rathenau's murder was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a series of assassinations targeting prominent politicians in the early years of the Weimar Republic. In January 1919, the communist leaders Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were brutally murdered by counter-revolutionary soldiers who had been instructed by the government to crack down on the Spartacist uprising. 1 month later, the socialist minister-president of Bavaria, Kurt Eisner, was shot by a dismissed officer. In June 1921, the Bavarian independent social democratic politician Karl Gareis was murdered by a member of the paramilitary Freikorps after threatening to expose right-wing extremist mobilization measures. In August 1921, Matthias Erzberger, who had signed the armistice at Compiègne, which ended the First World War, was shot on a walk in the Black Forest by 2 former Marine officers. In June 1922, the mayor of Kassel, Philipp Scheidemann, who had proclaimed the Republic from the balcony of the Reichstag in 1918, was attacked with hydrocyanic acid, but he managed to fight back and fortunately survived. And all these were just some of the most prominent examples. Whoever stood up for the Republic, argued for the fulfillment of the demands set at Versailles, or called for the fight against far-right nationalist units, had to fear that he could be the next target. Most of the murderers had a similar background. They were former soldiers or Freikorps members who struggled to find a new purpose in life after being demobilized. They struggled to reintegrate into society after being used to years of violence and soldier life, and they hated the Republic because they believed that they had been abandoned or betrayed. And so, many of them tried to cope with their pointless existence by taking out their anger at politicians who they deemed responsible. On the same day as Rathenau's death, the Reichstag came together for a special session with the intention of finally fighting back. The chairman of the German National People's Party, Karl Helfferich, who had been one of Rathenau's harshest critics, was booed out when he entered parliament, and the Social Democrats, Communists and Independent Social Democrats pointed at him while shouting, "This is the murderer." The situation only calmed down when the president of the Reichstag threatened to dissolve the session. Afterwards, Chancellor Joseph Wirth announced strong measures against the attackers and their supporters. He received thunderous applause from the democratic parties, whose members once stood up and yelled, "Long live the Republic," 3 times. In a second session in the evening, Wirth read out the emergency regulation which the president had just formulated. The new law threatened the prohibition of all anti-republican associations and assemblies and made insulting the Republic and its representatives a punishable offence. A second emergency decree 4 days later announced the death sentence for everybody who was a member of a group that advocated for the murder of elected representatives. On the 25th of June, the trade unions organized a mass demonstration in the Berlin Lustgarten, which was attended by hundreds of thousands of people who waved the black, red and gold flag. On that day, another session took place in the parliament, and Wirth used the opportunity to condemn the murderers. There stands the enemy, dripping its poison into the wounds of a people. There stands the enemy, and there is no doubt about it. The enemy stands on the right. Once again, he received thunderous applause. On the 27th of June, the official funeral ceremony took place. Rathenau's coffin was put up behind the speaker's podium of the parliament, and President Friedrich Ebert gave an inspiring speech. This heinous act did not affect Rathenau alone. It affects Germany as a whole. The bloody deed was directed against the German Republic and against the idea of democracy. It is an attack on the nation. Later that day, a massive crowd of people gathered outside, despite the rain, to accompany Rathenau on his last procession to the family grave in Oberschöneweide. It seemed like the German populace was united. Even staunch conservatives like Viktor Klemperer were moved. The disgustingly vile murder has pushed me far to the left. But not everyone was mourning. Many German nationalists, especially in Bavaria, secretly rejoiced at the news of Rathenau's death. In some barracks of the army, where sympathy for nationalist causes ran deep, drinking bouts were organized. At the University of Heidelberg, physics professor and Nobel Prize winner Philipp Lenard refused to close down his institute for the day and put the flag on half-mast. While all this was happening, the authorities were emphatically searching for the murderers. It was pretty clear that they were not just confused perpetrators, but came from an organized right-wing radical organization. The murderers operated within a large countrywide relationship network, and the attack was planned in a very decentralized way. The 2 attackers were quickly identified as 23-year-old Erwin Kern and 26-year-old Hermann Fischer. They were former Marine officers and were studying at the universities of Kiel and Chemnitz. The car they used had been picked up in Freiberg in Saxony, and the submachine gun came from army stocks in Schwerin. Before the attack, the 2 men often got visited by middlemen who supplied them with cash and information. Their escape after Rathenau's death also points to them being part of an underground network. At first, Kern and Fischer made their way north to the Baltic coast, where they planned to hop on a sailing ship and escape to Denmark. But due to the stormy weather, the 2 of them decided to instead turn south and get to Bavaria, a state which was notorious for tolerating right-wing radical organizations. While they were taking a rest in the Saaleck Castle near Naumburg, they got tracked down by the local population and then swiftly surrounded by the police. Their game was over, but they weren't going to surrender. They climbed up the East Tower and gave one last cheer to their leader. "We are students from Kiel. Please give our regards to Captain Erhard. Captain Erhard, long live long live, long live. We know how we must die. We die for our ideals, and our successors will follow. Shortly after, one of the attackers died after being shot by a policeman, and the other responded by committing suicide. But who was this Captain Erhard? Hermann Erhard was born in 1881, and after dropping out of school, he joined the Imperial German Navy. He proved to be rather capable and managed to rise up the role of corvette captain. After the end of the First World War, he became horrified at the thought of a socialist revolution, and even though he was an ultra-nationalist and an enemy of democracy, he offered his services to the new republic. Erhard founded a paramilitary Freikorps unit, named it after himself, and then used it to violently crack down on communist insurrections in central Germany, as well as the Bavarian Soviet Republic. He also fought against Polish irregulars in Upper Silesia. In March 1920, he and his brigade played a major role in the infamous Kapp-Lüttwitz Putsch. I made a whole video about the Kapp-Lüttwitz Putsch a while ago, so I'll keep it short for now. After the government had announced the dissolution of all Freikorps and the reduction of the armed forces as demanded by the Treaty of Versailles, a group of conspirators consisting of Freikorps leaders, disloyal army officers and large landowners decided to plan a coup. On the 13th of March 1920, the Marinebrigade Erhard marched on Berlin and occupied the capital. The government was subsequently forced to flee because the army refused to take any action. And so the Social Democratic Party called for a nationwide general strike, which brought the country to a complete standstill. Due to resistance from the workers, sloppy planning, and the incompetence of the coup leaders, the planned uprising came to nothing after just 4 days. After the putsch, Erhard fled to Munich, where the local police headquarters supplied him with fake passports. In Bavaria, Erhard quickly began to organize a reactionary underground movement and recruited members all over Germany, Austria, and Hungary. The name of his organization was Organisation Consul, or OC, with Consul being a code name for Erhard himself. The OC was tightly organized, and the individual local groups received their orders directly from Munich. By summer 1921, the OC had several thousand members, many of whom were former members of Erhard's Marinebrigade. The OC was only uncovered after the murder of Matthias Erzberger, when the Public Prosecutor's Office of Baden charged Erhard's deputy, Manfred von Killinger, and numerous other conspirators with murder. The investigation caused loud protests from Bavaria because so-called patriotic men were persecuted by a non-Bavarian authority. Furthermore, due to the lacking evidence and the persistent silence of the accused, most suspects were quickly released. In the end, only OC leader, Manfred von Killinger, was brought before court but unfortunately acquitted from all charges. The half-hearted and constantly obstructed investigation ensured that the OC was able to continue organizing itself and carry out its assassinations of Walther Rathenau and Philipp Scheidemann. But what was the OC's goal? Essentially, it was nothing more than the toppling of Weimar democracy. From his experiences gathered during the Kapp-Lüttwitz Putsch, Erhard had learned that a militant approach was impossible, especially without support from the army. Erhard knew that the army was only partially loyal to the Republic, and he wanted to get it on his side. But that could only happen if there was a common threat, a left-wing insurrection, for example. So Rathenau's death was nothing more than a strategy to provoke and to cause chaos. In 1930, one conspirator described that the OC wanted to use Rathenau's death to provoke the communists into striking, so that Erhard could seize power and impose a dictatorship in the counterattack by the quickly assembled Freikorps. As we all know, this strategy did not work out. Instead, the parliament passed the Law for the Protection of the Republic in July 1922, which banned all anti-constitutional organizations, punished politically motivated acts of violence more severely, and established a special court to deal with the law. From now on, the Reichstag saw it as a priority to deal with anti-democratic threats coming from both the far right and the far left. However, the government was unable to apply the law as consistently as planned. On the one hand, there were widely differing views on the necessity of this law, and on the other hand, there were strong protests from some states, especially from Bavaria. The right-wing Bavarian government under Hugo Graf von Lerchenfeld saw the law as an encroachment on the sovereign rights of the states, and issued its own emergency decree to protect the constitution. After much back and forth, Bavaria and the Weimar state finally agreed on a makeshift compromise. The seemingly united state resistance against the enemies of the Republic after the Rathenau assassination thus quickly crumbled. For example, judges now had the opportunity to take stricter action against anti-democrats, but they often judged political offenders from the left much more harshly than those from the right. A communist was sent to prison for 4 weeks for describing Germany as a robber republic, while a right-wing nationalist was merely fined 70 marks by the same court for using the expression Jewish Republic. On top of that, Bavaria still remained a safe retreat for all enemies of the Republic. When the Prussian authorities decided to ban a student assembly at the University of Marburg after fearing that the organizers would use the event to justify the Rathenau murder, the racialist section of the student body simply retreated to the Bavarian city of Würzburg. The court case brought against those behind Rathenau's death also proved to be unsatisfactory. In October 1922, 17 defendants were brought to trial, most of them still being young students from a well-off background who had been disoriented from the tumultuous war and post-war years and then joined right-wing nationalist organizations. The driver, Ernst Werner Techow, was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and Ernst von Salomon, the man who organized the car, received 5 years in prison. Many other participants got 3 years in prison. These sentences were unusually harsh, and the court did not show any mercy. The main problem with the process was that the court never truly bothered to uncover the organization that was behind the murder. As the chief public prosecutor, Ludwig Ebermeier, explained it, the thread leading from Rathenau's murder and the perpetrators in various directions are too tangled to be untangled today. It would take until October 1924 that the Organisation Consul was finally brought before court, but the proceedings were disheartening. The judges openly showed their sympathy towards the terrorists. Ebermeier described the accused as honorable, patriotic and fearless men. Only 16 of the 26 accused were actually punished, and only to laughable prison sentences lasting between 3 and 8 months. Hermann Erhard himself escaped punishment by fleeing to Austria. Subsequently, he lost more and more importance. After joining the NSDAP in the 1930s and placing himself and his brigade under the command of the Reichsführer SS, he fled back to Austria after the Night of the Long Knives, where he died in 1971. At first, the Rathenau murder seemed to unite the Germans against the anti-democrats and strengthen the young republic. The outrage was directed entirely at the radical right, and with the law for the protection of the republic, Weimar now had a powerful tool at its disposal. Particularly notable was the banning of the Deutsch-völkischer Schutz- und Trutzbund in most states, which had been one of the largest racialist and anti-Semitic organizations at the time. Even the German National People's Party decided to reconsider their positions at least somewhat. Wilhelm Henning, who had compiled the anti-Semitic tirade against Rathenau, was excluded from the party, and shortly after those sympathetic to him left as well. The party's radically anti-Semitic and racialist wing broke away to form a new party, which soon faded into obscurity. The Rathenau murder was also one of the main reasons for the reunification of the two social democratic parties in September 1922, which caused a significant shift to the left within the Social Democratic Party. In this short period, where the Republic seemed to be stronger than ever before, Harry Graf Kessler wrote, "The bitterness towards the murderers is deep and genuine, as is the determination to maintain the Republic, which runs much deeper than the pre-war monarchical patriotism." In the long term, however, Rathenau's death did more harm than good. For one, it obviously deprived Germany of one of its most capable and intelligent statesmen. Rathenau remains one of the biggest what-ifs in Weimar history, and the subsequent course of events could most definitely have gone down a very different path if he had had the chance to unfold his full potential. On top of that, a political crisis broke out in November 1922 after President Ebert had demanded an expansion of the government in the face of the growing economic crisis. The Centre Party and the German Democratic Party wanted to include the National Liberal German People's Party, something which the Social Democrats opposed due to disagreements over how to stabilise the German currency. Insurmountable obstacles and dwindling confidence in the Chancellor ultimately led to the resignation of the Wirth government. It was replaced by a bourgeois minority cabinet consisting of the Centre, the German Democratic Party, the German People's Party and the Bavarian People's Party, and some independents under the non-party Chancellor Wilhelm Kuno. Hopes that the new government's economic competence would resolve the crisis and secure a reparations compromise proved to be misplaced. After the failure of the Paris Reparations Conference in January 1923, the French and the Belgian armies marched into the Ruhr area. This was the kickoff to the Year of Crisis, in which the German people suffered from hyperinflation and in which the Republic had to face separatist movements, political upheaval and coup attempts. The vile assassination of Walther Rathenau had a lasting impact on German society. The 24th of June, the day of his death, remained a day for public mourning. For many Democrats and liberals, Rathenau became a martyr, and it became an annual tradition to visit his grave. Streets and schools were named after him. Freinwalde Castle, which Rathenau lived in, was gifted to the county of Oberbarnim under the condition that it be made publicly accessible and turned into a museum. In 1929, a commemorative plaque was unveiled at the scene of the crime. This all changed after the Nazi seizure of power in 1933. They wanted to erase all public memory of this representative of the Republic they so detested. The commemorative plaque was removed, the streets and schools were renamed, and the museum at Freinwalde Castle was turned into a shrine to its former owners, the Hohenzollern family. The Nazis even had the audacity to turn Saaleck Castle, the place where Rathenau's murderers hid in, into a place of worship. An ornamented gravestone was erected at the local cemetery, honouring Kern and Fischer. After German reunification, Saaleck remained a popular pilgrimage site for neo-Nazis and far-right extremists, though these visits have been monitored and condemned by authorities. In 2000, the gravestone was fortunately carried away and destroyed, but many anti-democrats still frequent the site. In 2012, unknown individuals carried out a cloak and dagger operation, placing a boulder in the cemetery field on which the names of the assassins had been carved in runic scripts. It is likely that the boulder was set up by local National Democratic Party politicians, a neo-Nazi party. Fortunately, however, events like these are exceedingly rare, and Rathenau gets the recognition he deserves. In 1946, the commemorative plaque at the site of his death was set up again. Once again, many streets and schools in Germany are named after him. In Nuremberg, there is an underground station named after him, which also bears his portrait. In 2008, the Walther Rathenau Institute was founded in Berlin by two entrepreneurs with close ties to the Liberal Free Democratic Party, and with the goal of preserving Rathenau's heritage. The institute also awards the Walther Rathenau Prize to commend outstanding achievements in foreign policy. Some notable recipients were Hans-Dietrich Genscher, Mark Rutte, Margot Friedländer, Angela Merkel and Donald Tusk. In honouring Rathenau today, Germany not only remembers a man, but reaffirms the principles he stood for, which is the absolute least he deserves. Okay then, dankeschön for watching until the end. As you probably know, making these videos is incredibly time consuming, so if you want to make sure that I make more of them, please consider supporting me on Patreon. In exchange, you'll get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server, and depending on your tier, a number of other sweet benefits. In any case, I want to thank my invaluable supporters, without whom this wouldn't be possible. Marius Gerling, Ian York, Leader Titan, A Cup of Tea, Tristan Kriegsmann, Ryan Layton, Philip Marchewka, the Grand Duke of Sealand, Luca Drohle, Wienweh, Südorizer, Lyle Furphy, Yin, William, Big Dave, Folling and Turdham Bone. Have a very nice day and see you next time.